Yes.
blind.
But who's counting? This is only week 3, day 1.
You're still having fun, I hope. You get to be around for as long as we are, and just like,
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
Kind of like Groundhog Day. That's what COVID was.
Well, and it's
Every day.
And it's funny for me because it's like coming out of like fire chief world. I'm just used to moving at a very fast
Yeah.
pace. That's just normal for me. I don't. This guy's like, "Are you doing it?"
My husband says this nighttime. Last night I worked like 8, it's like Mark went out, and then
Yeah.
there was all this other crap. Both my phones, my Teams. My husband's like, I don't know if that's normal that you're surviving in that environment. Like, I think I'm going crazy. Nothing's happening.
Yeah.
We did.
Did you ever meet Tim Walz? He's the sheriff.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. He worked up there.
Okay.
And he and I were partners. He's at St. Paul, and I got the job in college. Yeah, I just want you to understand something. There's city busy and state busy. And the two are nowhere near the same.
That is a very valid point, actually.
This is at the city, you got something, and you just got it done.
Yeah.
Here, there's a process.
Yeah, there's 14 processes. From
And it took me 6 months to do that. Slow pace.
Bonnie RBC, yeah, always got it. You know, the ones we say,
Yeah.
so
Oh, yeah.
like our level of and then some people sleep in the bathroom.
Yes.
Some of the truth.
Hey, Mike, how are you? Mind your way. What can I do to be
I
in
just
your way?
wanted you to think that.
Yeah, I was just gonna say. Or take one out of it.
We can do either, whatever you want. We just sort of set it up based on what we're running, recommended, what kids last year. Yeah. Wherever you want. Very quick.
I can move it, you guys need me to move.
Good. Camera will shoot over you.
I wanna be in the shot. That's why I don't want to start.
You want to ruin his shot?
You guys wanna do any audio tests? I can do the wireless. Wonderful. So you remember it for next time, you're trying to figure out how much space we need, and also know it's like, never, you're trying to do it for 2 years, this year. This is luxurious for us, I think we're all happy. Not standing out in the rain, not in the snow, flood water.
Didn't have to go to Stillwater. I got the thing this morning saying what I was doing. I'm like, oh, there wasn't aware yet. Like, oh, don't be out of Stillwater, Newport, somewhere along the river.
It's true, so it's.
What, mic or line?
Put it on mine, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You like check audio or?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so the governor's mics,
Popped up on right.
governor's mic's gonna be hot all the time. And then we have the wireless for the other folks, so if that gets too loud, again, this pretty, I can bump it down a little bit if need be, so.
Sounds good. Can you talk into it as if you like sitting?
Yep, not a problem. So the governor will be here.
Right, that's perfect.
Yeah, we're good there? Okay, awesome. Anybody else need to do audio? We good? I think I got one more.
You need to sing a song, that's when you do the mic
One more
check.
time.
Yeah, I didn't bring my bucket to carry my tune. 1, 2, 3, 4.
You
Miracle.
have to buy my crap, I don't like it.
Oh, that's my deadpan humor, so I'm actually buying into it. It's just, it's pretty, I watched it, it's pretty sure.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, nobody knows that I'm actually being serious. It's my funny.
Yeah, very sweet. Yeah,
Should would have brought the cloak, but didn't really go with this.
serious about it. Don't let anyone tell you that you should.
I know. It was myself. I'm not a person.
I know. I have one of those like capes, like yeah, those.
We got a beanie hat. Right?
Better.
That's what I'll use. Maybe tomorrow, I mean, that's Saturday. I mean, we revamped Friday. That's a romantic time of it, and they always do everything there. Yeah, it's been. If you have like light flight, that's one station. That's you work at.
Having time to go here after this. Go eat lunch.
Last line. Last line.
I think I know where it is.
And then we'll just.
Can you go all this way?
Oh, that's, okay, good. So.
We have like lunch, and because she wasn't able to order it for, she never applied.
And then
That's the one place that
you want to go forward.
we go to work, that we go to one place.
X-ray or where the intro ends, and then you can. It's on I just.
No, you're good. We're good. Actually, I might have a. I don't know. Searching my flag for my person. But I can station it. That's where.
We also got
started like both Vince and Butch, like,
Yeah, that's good. How are you? Good to see you. Jen?
Oh, yes, nice to see
Just
you.
a minute.
You're welcome.
then I'll day shop. But then I just tell me, I don't know.
Yeah. And there's nobody over there, so they can't.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon. Red River open right now up in Fargo?
It's still, it's flowing, I think. And when we were there and, we saw it in Moorhead, seeing some of the ice. These are the experts, I guess. Maybe I will, does that give you an echo if I use this one, or take, how
The
about,
one was the best one.
which one is?
That little one.
Let me do this one. Is that better then?
Yeah.
Very good, sorry about that. Before I get started, I just want to acknowledge there's so many people get involved in the ability to respond to disasters, whether they be natural disasters, some of them yearly, which we see weather disasters, or a fire, or human issues that come up, and all those people behind that many times you don't see. I want to extend our sympathies to the folks at Vehicle Services. Becky McDell, a longtime employee, reaching nearly to retirement age after a dedicated service to Minnesota passed this week. So I know a lot of folks who are working on the things we're working on are also dealing with that. So to Becky and her family, we want to, on behalf of the state of Minnesota, express our deepest sympathies. Well, thank you all for being here again. Many of us were mentioning it felt a little more like the normal cadence of coming to this building with flood season. We're land of 10,000 lakes. We move a lot of water. We have major rivers. We get lots of snow. And we have an interesting geography that our rivers run both north-south, and you get different watersheds and the Great Lakes. And so we're at that time of year where work has been being done for a long time, but I think from the public's awareness, they're starting to see with the warmer temperatures and the waters rising, just to be able to be prepared as possible. I know a lot of that work has already been done. I will re-stress again, the system that works between federal, state, local agencies around, especially flooding, is well perfected. We used a lot of the best practices even during the time of COVID to use what they do with these to prepare managers to disseminate information and to adjust plans as the situation changes. So this is a lot of hard work. It's a lot of planning that goes into it. We always say we hope that the flooding season is not that bad, but hope is not a plan, and we're prepared for it. So I think today's purpose was to put the experts in front of you, from the National Weather Service to the folks at Department of Public Safety, others, Corps of Engineers, folks that can help Minnesotans understand where we're at. We also have folks from Commerce to talk about flood insurance and some of the things that comes up on property. And I also want to give a thank you. I think as we speak, maybe, the Revisor's Office is finishing up some work that our disaster contingency account, which I want to thank the legislature and congratulate them on the foresight a few years back to put in this account. It'll have $40 million into it. We've drawn upon it multiple times, where if we don't reach major emergency status or declaration status where FEMA comes in and there's some federal help in this, the state of Minnesota is still prepared in a very efficient, effective manner to move funds when we need to. I believe the Senate is set to take that up, finalized, and we should be able to sign that thing in the next day or so to replenish that account, and that's in perfect timing with that. So you're going to hear a lot of the specifics on this. We'll be glad at the end of the presentation to take questions on that. I think I'm going to turn it over to Dan, our meteorologist. As many of us, we are hanging on their words every night, especially when we saw yesterday. I'm very careful about saying things are normal or unusual because they think in longer patterns in different ways. But today, I think reminding folks, it can be very deceptive that we're just building towards some of the higher stages of this. At the same time, we're in a fire danger mode, and those are kind of, I don't know how often we see those things come together. So I'm going to turn it to Dan, and we'll move through the presentation and then take some questions. So Dan, please go ahead.
All right, thank you very much, Governor. So yes, as the Governor alluded to, we are now going right into the heart of our spring this year. It's been quite a winter, as we all know, here in the Twin
We're getting
Cities.
feedback on him. I'm gonna go this one. Does that help?
Is that better? Okay.
They get pickup on that.
Okay, great. All right, so I'll start over. All right, so thank you very much, Governor. Like the Governor alluded to, we are going into the heart of our flood season. It's just now starting to pick up. This is coming on the heels of what was a very active winter. As we all know, we had quite a bit more snow here in the Twin Cities, over twice as much snow as normal over the past winter. And that wasn't just here, that was across the entire state. And now with this rapid warm-up, this rapid 3-day-long summer, we've got that snow is rapidly melting and that water's got to go somewhere, and it's going right into the rivers around the state. So I'll get right into what we're dealing with. Right now, as you can see on this map, highlighting a lot of points along the rivers across the state, this is forecast flood level through next Wednesday. The oranges are going to be your minor areas of flooding, your red, moderate, and your purple up into major. We do have a few areas expected to go into major. What's noteworthy about what we have here is it's not just one or two rivers, it's across the state. And so this is a widespread event that we are looking at. That melting snow and recent rainfall has already started reaching the lower or the smaller creeks and streams. So those are starting to go up, and we're going to see those continue to go up over the next several days over the weekend, and then that water will start to get channeled into our larger main stem rivers, such as the Minnesota, the Mississippi, and the St. Croix, and of course the Red River of the North. So we will be watching very closely those larger stem rivers as we head into the next several weeks. And I really want to highlight those because the longer duration of the flooding along those rivers makes them more susceptible to additional rain that we don't yet quite know how much we'll have down the road. So those are the rivers that we really need to watch moving forward.
Could you pronounce your last name?
Yes, Hoblitzel. So we're showing here an animated image of how much snow, this is not snow depth, this is actually how much water was in the snowpack. And so you can see those darker blues were as much as 3, 4, 5 inches of liquid water in that snowpack that since April 1st just rapidly melted into the soils. So that's what we're dealing with. And we do think that this map right at the end might still be a little underrepresentative of some of the snow still left over. We do still have pockets of snow left across the state. And of course, it's important to point out we still have quite a bit of snow cover left in a few areas, most notably the upper parts of the Minnesota River and then much of the Red River of the North Basin. So those rivers are already starting to go up, and there's more liquid water sitting in the snowpack ready to flow in. So that's what we will be watching very closely. To highlight a few rivers, just a few, what we've called a few hot spots here. This image here is the Redwood River at Redwood Falls, which right now is peaking. This is what's considered a minor flood for that area to help visualize what we're dealing with. You can see some chunks of debris and a little bit of ice in that river. That's kind of representative of a lot of what we're dealing with right now. But some rivers around there are going to get even higher than what we're dealing with here at Redwood Falls. Just to highlight a few, the upper Minnesota River right now, we are expecting widespread minor to moderate flooding there. Could have a few movement of ice. Ice jams are a little bit of a threat. Fortunately, we're not dealing with prolonged freezing weather, so the prolonged ice jam threat will be minimized. That's one good thing about the warmer weather that we have right now. The Crow in central Minnesota also going up into minor to moderate flood. Red River of the North and the Rainy. These are two that are really worth highlighting. These are the two longer duration flood events that haven't even gotten going yet. So both of those basins still have quite a bit of snow left on the ground, ready to melt. And these will be several weeks. Both of these areas will see the rises over the next few weeks. These we really need to watch because if we do happen to get any heavy rainfall, while the other rivers have started to go down, these might still be really well going up into flood and could produce possibly up to major flooding in these if conditions come in just right. So these have the highest uncertainty and are what we need to watch the most. Coming into here around the Twin Cities area, just selecting two spots. On the left, we've got the Mississippi River at St. Paul. This spot, of course, is getting fed by the Minnesota, and in addition to the Mississippi upstream. So this is certainly a hot spot here in St. Paul because you've got the convergence of several channels of water coming in a meeting. And that, of course, leads to a little more uncertainty since we've got two different major rivers to deal with by the time it gets here. As of now, the current forecast takes St. Paul just shy of major flood stage into the moderate. So that would peak sometime around late next week. It's important to note that this is not including any additional rainfall that could happen through that time or after that time. So it does look well into moderate at least, and we cannot rule out that major flood levels start to impact the city of St. Paul. Similar story over at Stillwater along the St. Croix River. This one we have peaking just at the threshold for a major flood. Again, given the snowmelt upstream across Wisconsin, that could go higher, especially if we get any additional heavy rain. So this just underscores the importance of looking at the upcoming weather patterns to see how much rain we have coming up. So exactly how much rain we have, we do have a system coming in this weekend. Right now, we can pretty safely say those rainfall amounts should, for the most part, stay under an inch, looking anywhere from about a ½ inch to an inch at most. This graphic here on the right, the solid shade of green is in that ½ inch to inch level. You can see it's pretty much widespread across the state. What we will have to watch is if we get a few pockets of heavier, maybe closer toward that inch, that could have a higher effect on the current river levels. Right now, this doesn't look to be enough to really make any significant changes. It could nudge some of those river forecasts up slightly by a couple of feet and or prolong those crests by a day or two. So that's worth watching this weekend. Beyond that, we have quite a bit of uncertainty, and that's probably the most important thing to underscore. Beyond this system, we are not currently looking at anything that a heavy signal of a widespread heavy rain event, but we also don't see a heavy signal that it won't be. It's really kind of, it could go either way. We'll have to just hope that we don't deal with a system like that, but as the governor alluded to, hope is not a plan. So we do want to be sure to be on the lookout just in case a system does come in. And some indications are that there could be heavier rainfall impacting especially northern parts of the state maybe later next week. So that's something we absolutely have to watch out for. But just to summarize with some final thoughts, we do have this ongoing flooding. It is going to get worse. Thankfully, a few conditions were in place that are keeping this from being quite as bad as it could be, most notably the drought that we were in earlier last year. That has helped the soils absorb some of that moisture. And the frost levels are a little higher than normal. So that's helping the ground to absorb some of that moisture instead of sending it into the rivers. Like I said, we will have to watch this upcoming precipitation for any patterns, and most importantly, those larger main stem rivers that will be up higher for a longer duration. Those are going to be the ones most susceptible to any additional rainfall that we can't yet quite predict. So that's what we'll really want to keep an eye on, again, being the Red River of the North, St. Croix, Minnesota, and the Mississippi. And that's all I have.
Thanks, Dan. We're going to turn it to Colonel Wilkins. I think what we're going to do is just thank you so much. We're going to pull that tape up, move it over to you.
Not a problem.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Lieutenant Colonel Rob Wilkins. I'm the Deputy Commander for the St. Paul District of the Army Corps of Engineers. Amongst our other authorities, we work to reduce disaster risk, and public safety is a core priority for the Corps of Engineers. We are currently working very closely with state, federal, and local communities to prepare for and respond to any flooding events within the region here. We have supported numerous state and local flood fights throughout the state during the last few decades. Our engineers and our teammates are members of the local communities here. They know the watersheds, and they are familiar with the folks that are going to be protected. Our area engineers are meeting with the local community leaders on a regular basis to coordinate flood plans and response plans. We also ensure that they understand the process for requesting federal assistance, which we are able to provide. We are well positioned and prepared to provide assistance this year if called on. We are ready to provide technical assistance, flood fight materials such as sandbags and pumps, and technical oversight and contracting for emergency levees to protect critical infrastructure. We have pre-positioned flood fight materials from the Federal Flood Fight Materials Center in Rock Island at most of our facilities across this state and North Dakota so that they are ready and can quickly be positioned where they're needed as the waters rise. We have monitoring teams active right now, collecting information on the ground about water levels, snowpack, and where the rivers are at. We had engineers working through the weekends with the National Weather Service to produce the models that we're using to determine whether the rivers are going to hit a moderate or a severe flood stage. We're able to produce those models rapidly for any change in conditions, such as additional or decreased precipitation. We are updating them daily, and we are communicating that information to the local communities. We're closely monitoring the situations in the Red River, the Minnesota River, and the Mississippi River valleys. The Corps maintains 6 reservoirs used to fight flooding on the Red River, and our water management team has been drawing them down so that we can increase storage capacity in those reservoirs. Likewise, we maintain another 6 reservoirs in the Mississippi headwaters that have also been drawn down to increase capacity so that we can mitigate the increased flows going downriver. We have teams working through the weekends to keep our information models up to date for the areas that we identify as the highest risk. We have flood fight materials pre-positioned where we think they're most likely to be needed, and we are ready to provide assistance if called on, sir. Pending any questions, that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Lieutenant Colonel Wilkins. We're going to get our assistance again, do a double time. Move it to Interim Director Reed from Homeland Security Emergency Management here in the state.
Thank you, Governor. In this state with 1,000 lakes and 1,000 rivers, flooding is inevitable. And just looking at 2022, last year over 30 counties, 30 events had major flooding. In addition to that, we had several other events that either the governor declared or presidentially declared activity. We are working with our partners, local jurisdictions, tribal emergency managers, and cities' emergency managers to make sure the emergency management system will work for everybody in the state of Minnesota. We're working with the Corps of Engineers on sandbagging and pumps and other things to be ready and positioned where we might need them. The State Emergency Operations Center, which you're standing in right now, is in monitoring status, and we are ready to elevate that status as we need to support our local emergency managers. We are coordinating with the DNR on several items to help the flood fight. We're looking at all the data from the Weather Service to make sure that we can provide information to the local emergency managers to make the best decisions at their level and that we can support. We assure you that the emergency management system in Minnesota of local, city, tribal, and state and federal partners are ready for you. Now we ask you be ready to help you as well. Make sure you have your kit ready. Make sure you have a plan. And as we've seen over the last couple of days, please do not drive or swim or float in flooded rivers. We've had several events over the last couple of days where we had to rescue people that were in rivers. Please turn around, don't drown. For more information on what we're doing and what we can tell, you can go to our social media or our flood page, hsem.dps.mn.gov. We urge all Minnesotans to be prepared. Help yourself, and then we can come and help you. Disaster assistance can come either through the governor's declaration, depending, or if it gets large enough for the presidential disaster. Make sure you have what you need and stay aware and look out for the alerts. We will be there to help. Thank you.
Thanks, Director Reed. We're going to pass this microphone down to Floodplain Manager Strauss.
Okay, thank you. I'm Seal Strauss. I'm the state floodplain manager. I'm also the state National Flood Insurance Program coordinator, meaning I coordinate with FEMA on a lot of things. And just as a little bit of background where DNR fits in, We work with the communities on regulating the floodplain in their communities. They're the one with the floodplain regulations, the ordinances, giving out the permits, working with their emergency managers and the important boots on the ground. We assist them with administering those regulations, interpreting the maps, understanding their maps. And speaking of the maps, I do want to mention that we regulate what's called the 1% annual chance flood, commonly called the 100-year flood, but we try not to call it the 100-year flood because people think I've had a big flood this year, I'm good for another 99 years. That's not the case. But so moving on, the other thing I wanted to mention is when you see those graphs showing the minor, moderate, major flooding, that is not related to the 1%, the 100-year flood. Usually when it's hitting the major level, it might be a 10-year flood. It's definitely not a 100-year flood. So people will say, well, why isn't it flooding all the places on these maps? It's because those are based on what kind of damage do we expect in our communities, whether it's minor, moderate, major damage, whereas our floodplain maps are looking at statistical likelihood of flooding and flood risk. A reminder, this is a great time to be talking about flooding because we know where the spring flooding will be or is more likely to be on the big rivers. But as FEMA likes to remind us, anywhere it rains, it can flood. And we do have big storms throughout the year, and it's getting to be the point where it is more of the year than in the past. And especially in the last 20, 30 years, we're seeing more big floods due to really big storms. We're seeing 8, 10, 12, even 14 inches of rain in areas. And the modeling for the 100-year floods usually based on a 6 to 8 inch rain. So we are seeing bigger flood than what are on the maps. So all through the year, we want to be listening to what the National Weather Service is telling us about upcoming concerns about flooding. Reminder to be aware of what the flood risk is in your area. We did put together a video a couple years ago titled, "Is My House in the Floodplain?" And that's intended for anyone to take a look at, try to go to understand how to look at the FEMA site and see what the floodplain is in their area. We also encourage people to take a look at, we have a DNR site where we've got the elevation contours, getting an idea of where you are relative to the surroundings. Are you in a bowl that you're likely to get a lot of water when we do have a big rain? So we have some of those resources available. As the others we're talking about here, have a plan, know what your risk is, listen to your emergency managers about evacuation or any preparation that you should be doing. Those local officials are the professionals. If they're putting out barriers on those roads, please don't go around those barriers and pay attention to what those local emergency managers are saying. For communities, again, we encourage them to have a plan. There's a lot of resources available. They can work with the Homeland Security Emergency Management folks, get some good plans in place. Please properly enforce your floodplain regulations. We've had regulations over 50 years. That's helped us to reduce the new damage and to avoid more damage to buildings in the future. And we've got some opportunities to do bigger scale projects to reduce risk. And luckily, we've had good funding at the state level to help with grants to do those projects and getting grants from FEMA and the feds there to help do some really good projects around the state that we've definitely reduced risks from the past in many of our communities. Let's see, on that slide there is pointing out some of the resources we have, that we do have information for communities, for individuals to learn more about risk, places to go to see the forecasts and to see your risk. And then I'll just end with a few high points on flood insurance. Julie will get into more of the details, but reminder that your normal home insurance, that the folks that you work with for your home insurance for fire, tornadoes, whatever, that does not, except in rare cases, those do not cover flood damage. So you have to have a separate flood insurance policy. Anyone who lives in a community that participates in the National Flood Insurance Program, which is over 96% of the people in Minnesota, you can get a flood insurance policy. Unfortunately, some agents tell people they can only get a policy if they're in the mapped zone. That is not true. You can get a policy anywhere in the community. And as I mentioned, we're getting bigger floods, so there's definitely places outside the mapped areas that are at risk. And FEMA doesn't map the low areas. They don't map the stormwater ponds in some of those small tributaries. So there can be risk that is not mapped by FEMA in your community. You can get coverage for both the building itself and contents. Sometimes when the bank requires a flood insurance policy, they don't tell people that the policy they care about is just for the building and that you might want to get a policy covering your stuff also. Also, speaking of flood insurance policies, it does normally take 30 days for them to go into effect unless you're getting a new loan, and then that day it will go into effect. And that flood insurance claims are made when you have overland flooding, that either the river got really high and it flowed, or you got a lot of rain that came down and it flowed over the land. It does not cover groundwater seepage into basements, just so people are aware of what it can cover and what you can make claims on. And basement coverage gets a bad rap, but it does cover the foundation, it does cover your furnace, your water heater, those integral parts of your basement. And I'll leave it to Julia.
Sure.
Hello, I'm Julia Dreyer. I'm the Deputy Commissioner of Insurance at the Department of Commerce. I wanted to underscore several of the points that my colleague Seal just mentioned. Just a few quick statistics. A homeowner is 27 times more likely to experience a flood versus a fire over the course of a 30-year mortgage. And 1 inch of water can cause $25,000 in damage. Last year, Minnesota was hit by 6 weather disasters that exceeded $1 billion in property damage, the most since federal agencies started keeping track. These numbers speak to both the likelihood and the severity of storms and floods. However, the stat that really stands out for me as the Deputy Commissioner of Insurance is that misconception that if I have homeowners insurance, that I'll be covered for flood damage. More than half of all homeowners do not realize that their policies don't actually cover damage covered by floods. Minnesota also has the lowest adoption rate for flood insurance in the country, with just 0.33% of homes covered by a national flood insurance program policy. As others have mentioned, flooding happens even outside of the designated flood zones, particularly as storms become more frequent and more intense. That's important certainly for the spring flooding season, but with our changing climate, it may make sense for the rest of the year too, because even in places that don't often see spring flooding. So that's why we wanted to underscore that we encourage homeowners and renters to research both their coverage options and to talk to an insurance professional to make sure that they understand the options available to them, to look at their policies, know what is covered. And we encourage insurance professionals as well to educate themselves so they can provide smart guidance about flood insurance to their customers. You can find more information certainly on Commerce's website or on the website of the National Flood Insurance Program. Thank you.
I want to thank all of our partners. I think for ease for the press, we're going to set up a podium here. We'll take some questions on that. I would just remind folks that just saying that our toolbox is open. We've got a lot of tools. We've got time-tested plans to be able to execute. This is helping neighbors get that done. And so we'll take a few questions here from this group that's up here after we set up the podium, make it a little easier. Thanks. Thank you all. Very helpful. You guys can feel free to, I think they're going to be calling on you more than me. They know what I don't know, and so. Sure.
Last year we saw record-breaking flooding, particularly on the rainy river basin. They had about 6 feet, I think, above average for about 2 months.
Yeah.
Devastating for the community there. But how does this flooding season compare for
Yeah, I think I'll bring the folks up here who have some historical knowledge on this. And that was a tough one because it took months to come down, and that was a historical flood. So I think it's really nice to hear the clarification on this, what a 100-year flood is and how people think about this. But let's bring the experts up to look where we're at today.
Yes, thank you. So with the Rainy River, yes, last year had quite historical levels of flooding. What happened last year was we had the unfortunate coincidence of a long duration snowpack that stayed on the ground quite a while into the spring, and then we had abnormally high rainfall on top of that. This year, those ingredients, at least for the snowpack, not looking quite as bad as last year. We are starting to erode it more slowly up there. As far as the rainfall that occurred, that was very unusual. That was a very abnormal amount of rain. Can we rule it out this year? Absolutely not, but that is quite uncommon. So while we would say just that magnitude of flooding is unlikely in any given year, while we can't rule it out this year, it's certainly worth preparing for and monitoring upcoming weather patterns.
The cresting of St. Croix is expected next week. Is that also true of the Mississippi in St. Paul?
Correct.
Where's the Red River fit in? Are they behind this kind of a little bit? And when might we get a crest in Fargo Hornet?
Yeah, so the Red River Basin is quite a bit more slow. As you saw with the maps, there's still snow. Parts of the river are still frozen. And so it's just the upper part of the Red River of the North right now that's starting.
From the Hudson Bay drainage, which includes the Rainy River, the western Great Lakes tributaries in Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and then the whole upper Mississippi down to St. Louis. We cover parts of 9 states. And the snowpack on the Red was near historic levels this year in parts of it, a little bit thinner in the northern part, but definitely down in the Fargo, very thick. We've had a fortunate melt scenario so far where it's been very dry, but spring does typically bring rain, and since that peak will likely be a week or more out, especially in the southern part, and then possibly 2 to 3 weeks in the northern part, we're very susceptible to additional rainfall. So that's really the point here. And we're right, even with a dry melt, so no rain, we're looking at the very threshold of where they have to start to do additional protective measures. Even though there's a lot of permanent protection in the communities there, it's at that threshold where they can't risk an upside event with rainfall. So they're watching it very, very closely, along with the Army Corps of Engineers out there trooping through the field in the wet and cold. So, yeah, and the same thing with the Rainy. Big snowpack in the Minnesota side, less so in the Canadian side than what happened last year. But last year was a severe drought going into that, and then the historic rainfall. This year we went in fairly wet in the fall. Big snowpack. What's the rain going to do to us? So but we're working very closely with Environment Canada, the National Weather Service, Environment Canada, Lake of the Woods Control Board. The lakes have been drawn down to their legal threshold limit, the low part to absorb the water, but nature has the last say.
Dispel that as soon as you can.
Can you talk a little bit about that FEMA part? Sure. About what FEMA will cover or will not cover? Sorry.
I think both, excuse me, both the points that you're making are very good ones. Excuse me. Frog in my throat. But there's 2 things going on there. FEMA did just adjust the way that they rate policies here a couple years ago, and things are more expensive than they've been in the past, especially for people outside the high-risk areas. And also there's a misconception that FEMA's going to swoop in after a flood and hand out money, and FEMA doesn't do that. First of all, they only come and give minimal assistance to homeowners and businesses if there's been a federal declaration. And that's only a small percent of the floods that get to the level where it's a federal declaration. And then if they do give any kind of assistance in a flood, it's maybe $5,000. It's not anything to make people whole. So people do have that misconception. They should be getting flood insurance to get better coverage, but they do have that misunderstanding, thinking that FEMA's going to come in and make them whole. In the past, we've had a lot more policies in the state. A lot of the policies were outside of the high-risk areas where flood insurance was mandatory if you had a federally backed loan. And now that the prices have gone up, a lot of those folks are dropping their policies because they're not as cheap as they used to be.
Is there more FEMA resources for public infrastructure if the individual disaster assistance?
Yeah, when there's a major disaster, FEMA does come in and assist the local governments with like repairing roads, replacing culverts, public buildings, those kinds of things. So that there is a lot of FEMA assistance that comes at that time. And at the state level, we've set it up so that we have state declarations, which is really wonderful compared to other states. We've got great resources for our local governments, and I should let.
I'm going to add on to that one. FEMA does do a great job, but it is shockingly minimal to folks. And just to know that because it's the whole country, and you've seen what's happened in Fort Lauderdale and things, it's a very high threshold. You can have your community look like it's really hit hard in a lot of infrastructure issues, and it's hard to meet those thresholds. And so I would echo that, that they're there to provide relief. They certainly won't make you whole. And I'm interested maybe to have come up here on this issue of why Minnesota is lower. Why, your opinion, why we're lower in the adoption of this, because of any state who should understand water, it's us. And so,
I mean, right? I don't know why we're the lowest in terms of national adoption. I don't, if it's just historical or what, but to your point around like rates and rate increases, I mean, just in general, it certainly on the private side, it has to do with like the severity and the number of storms that we're seeing and the costs that are increasing, and that subsequently comes back to consumers.
And on that point, though, about, a record number of billion-dollar disasters, that's kind of the story across the country, more expensive, more frequent, damaging storms. Governor, is the amount that they replenish the account, the disaster account, enough? Do they have to start adding more each year?
no, it's a great question, and I'm going to echo on this, and I do think, and I want to give full credit for this. This was really, really smart, and I think as you heard from Manager Strauss, I talked to other governors and like, this is brilliant. We don't reach those thresholds. I can issue that declaration and we can get that money out right now. It's $40 million. Like I said, I believe it'll go either today or tomorrow. I'll be able to sign that. This is the reason, again, I'll come back to it. We think it's enough. It's enough we agreed upon. I think this is why you need functioning government. We asked for this money last May with anticipations of winter and winter storms and things. This is what happens when things don't get done on time. Now, I'm really pleased that there was a sense of urgency. We're going to get this done before the end of the session, but I think one of the things that this account does is give us flexibility. We have come back and replenished it between legislative sessions to fill it in. So I think this is an appropriate way to approach it, but I think your question kind of answers itself is no. We're going to see more and more of these. We're going to see higher costs that are associated there, and we need to think that that's going to mean that our response has to be in accordance to that.
Governor, on that note, your infrastructure budget had about $50 million for flood mitigation
Yep.
to prevent this on the front end. I'm curious about where things stand with that, if we might see money for mitigation.
Well, and I don't say this just to be nice on this. Thank you for the question. So this is an important part of that. I was just up in Moorhead, and I want to say I worked on it as a member of Congress for 10 years, and I want to thank everybody who was involved in this nonpartisanly, many different governors, many senators, many members of the House, many local folks. The Fargo-Moorhead Diversion Project. We're about 4 or 5 years out from that. We still have a few things on our side to take care of. We have it in the bonding bill. I was up there viewing these things. This is the point on this. Anything we can do to harden our infrastructure, to prepare for these things, to make sure that we are, and we're going to have to think about this in all the construction we do, from how we build roads and bridges to how we think about our houses, because this is going to become more normal. So yeah, this does impact that. That's why we thought an early bonding bill has projects in there. It also has some of these grants that you heard being talked about to local communities to do this. This is the smart way to do it. Every time we know when we invest this money, it will come back to us 10 times in what we will save. It also is the anguish and the things that people have to go through. I mean, I cannot wait till that is done in Fargo-Moorhead, that the chances then significantly reduced. And that's the way we're going to have to think about all these projects. So yes, important piece. Ask the legislature to get it done. These are bipartisan proposals based on the best science to reduce the mitigation risk. And where we see them and put them in place, I've worked on these in many places. Owatonna was an example of that. Local community coming together to build some of those projects. And I think that's where the state can help. But there's a lot of federal dollars coming in that are especially around the issues of climate change and climate issues that we can do on infrastructure. And so I think you'll see us doing a lot more of that.
Obviously, there's such thing as being underprepared for a spring flooding event like this. But if we were to have an abnormally dry spring, is there such thing as being overprepared, overinvested in this sort of thing?
No, and this is the one that you're always trying to strike it correctly. This is if you come in with everything, was it overkill that you came with? No, this is protecting Minnesotans, and we're going to always err on the side of caution. We're always going to err on the side of preparation. The one thing I come back to on this is a much more, if you will, predictable, and I know the Weather Service folks will get angry with me on this one, weather's never, but it's what we know, what they act, they know where we are, and we're preparing for different things. This is at least one where we have a bit of certainty around what will happen if we get this much water, and this is where the flood stage will be. This is how much more preparation. And I think, as you said, just the things that the Corps of Engineers did, Colonel Wilkins was right. They pre-position things. Might not use them. They'll be happy to put them back on the trucks, move them back, put them back into storage. I just think now is the time, and I hope Minnesotans know the cadence of these briefings will be dependent on what happens with the flooding situation. But I want to be clear, these folks have been working for months on many of this. This is an ongoing preparation. That toolbox is open, and what you're seeing is just more and more of a ramping up of that. So, no, I don't think so. I think on this, my hope is that did we do too much? Did we pre-position too much? Were we too ready? That's an okay scenario, but I think you're always trying to strike it right of where you're at. We certainly don't want to over sandbag every place we can be, but we are looking at this. And I just mentioned to the folks coming in here, these maps on Crest are amazing. These are river gauges and experts, the folks, Steve and the folks that know this, the hydrologists. I was mentioning I use a dog park near the river that traditionally floods. It was bone dry, and because of what we had, like the melt-off went. But the river prediction said it was going to hit a stage where traditionally it ran water into that dog park. I was there yesterday afternoon late. The prediction said sometime last night it was going to flood. This morning at 7 o'clock it was flooded. Those are predictions that help people plan around things. It helps. That was just a real-world example, and for folks, it's not magic. It's science. It's hard work. It's planning, and they're very, very accurate with where these are at. So I think those maps you saw in going to their websites where you can see where that, if you look at that, it's by day and it's by hours of where the crest is going, and to keep following that if you're interested, those are good places for data. So, well, thank you all for this. I want to give one last shout out to local press and tell Minnesotans, listen to your local press. As you heard say this, it goes without saying, but it is a tragic situation. Do not drive around a barrier. Stay away from those rivers. Keep the folks, the DNR folks, from having to be out there. This is a dangerous time. These rivers are going to swell. They're going to be unpredictable. And when you see a barrier on a road, we're seeing people get swept away. And in these flooding situations, one of the number one things that kills people is driving through an area that has been cordoned off. So listen to your local press. Listen to the news that gets out there. And as I said, we will up the cadence both if it's through press release that does it or if we're back in here again as this season unfolds. So stay safe, Minnesota. Thank you all. Thanks. Good advice. Yeah, I don't know why they don't do it, why we don't buy. We know where it's at.
Yeah.
And relatively compared to insurance, it's still relatively cheap. And I like your statistic on the fire. That is a really good one to put it. It really reframes you.
Right.
So good stuff. Those gates.
Part of it's because we have done a better job of regulating and keeping people out of the areas, but it's still on the low side. We still pay.
Hi, Caroline Cummings with the Base District. I just wanted to clarify that 0.33% of
We're close.
that don't have.
So thanks again. Thank you, sir. That's great. Thanks for having us.
Did you say that it's Minnesota's lowest, like, in the country of any state that have the least amount, which seems just bonkers to me, since we have so much water, but that's my off-the-record comment, okay? I just wanted to clarify that I didn't mishear you.
Probably over 50 communities in Florida that have more in their community than in our entire state.
Wow. I mean, they probably are also used to, hurricanes and all that.
I think it's just more of part of the culture.
Right.
just wanted to make sure I heard that correctly.
You heard it correctly.
Thank you.
Sounds wrong, but it's
And I'm
right.
jumping back in as well, Jesse, with the star trip. So it's the lowest in the country as far as adoption rate, or just, could I just say, you know, we have fewer people with flood insurance than anywhere else? Is that the way to describe it?
Per household.